All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar on the new configurable talent acquisition workflows. We'll cover today how to look at streamlining your application and hiring processes with these new workflows in the talent acquisition module. First, I want to talk a little bit about Intellius. We were established in 1999 and been working in the Lawson space since then. We have offices in Dallas and Chicago with consultants all across the country. We are also an Infor Alliance partner. In addition to the complementary software offerings we have with the Lawson Benefits, Lawson Payroll, AP Automation products and suites, we also offer a full array of Lawson technology services, upgrades, application consulting, and other cloud services to help with migrations to Infor's cloud and other cloud providers. For our agenda today, we're going to talk about what exactly is the application and hiring workflows, how do they integrate with the system, why you might look at implementing them, what does that configurable word really mean, and how does it apply here. Talk about some of the pain points they help resolve and why you might want to look at implementing the configurable hiring workflow and job application. As far as when are these features available, what versions do you need to be on to implement, what kind of timeline are you looking at to roll these out? As far as the how, we'll talk a little bit about our lessons learned in the field and a migration path going forward. And throughout the presentation, we'll also do some live demos so we can do some hands-on with the actual products, a little show and tell. Pass it over to Paula, who will be talking us through the first piece of the configurable job application and hiring workflow.
Thanks, Rob. So we'll start with really what can we configure. And how they're different. Well, the configurable job application, we look at overhauling the application process, which will impact the external candidates and the employees as the internal candidates. While the configurable hiring workflow will be overhauling the requisition and application management functionality. This will mostly impact the recruiters and the hiring managers. Throughout the presentation, we will stress the word configurable, as this is all configurable and can be implemented without customization or technical development. So we'll start with the configurable job application. So really, what is this all about? It's a new functionality that's truly configurable to meet all of your hiring needs. You can build multiple job applications so you can target various needs of the company. You can build reusable application tasks and reuse them across different applications. You can leverage eligibility groups to manage the requirements, and you can default the job application at either the org level, the position level, or select it on the requisition. This functionality is integrated, mobile, and responsive. It integrates seamlessly with the configurable hiring workflow and talent science. It's mobile friendly with the new 4.0 controls. So why would you use it? Well, we're finally going to eliminate some of these legacy TA pain points. With multiple job applications, you can finally have a different application based on hiring needs. Perhaps you would have a shorter application for an entry-level position and a longer for management, or different tasks if you're hiring a physician compared to an office manager. The user experience brings in the magic of mobility with responsive design using the new Soho 4.0 controls. We finally have the same experience for both internal and external applications, and there's now consistency across the employee lifecycle, as the application process will be consistent across through to transition management for your pre-boarding and onboarding. The latest addition to the functionality, which does require use of the configurable hiring workflow, is around incomplete applications. This allows automatic reminders to be sent to the applicant if they have an incomplete application. You can also use this data to analyze where the drop-offs are to approve your application to encourage completion of the application process. So when can we use it? The big answer is now. It's out there and ready. The only thing you need to do is make sure you have your 4.0 controls on. You have to be at least CU 27 for both the GHR talent management and the candidate zip file. For implementation, the expected timeline is 2 to 6 months to flow through the project planning, design application, completing the modifications to candidate space, piloting, and then user acceptance testing. And now I'll pass it back to Rob to talk about the how and move into the demo.
So to just touch on some of the kind of key concepts and components within the configurable job application. Looking at the workflow flowchart diagram on the left here, and this all starts with the application process. The first thing you're going to need to decide during your implementation is how many different types of application processes your organization is going to need. Again, this could be differentiating between physicians or non-physicians, hourly or salaried, the needs of which really depend on your organization. But anytime you may need a different application process for different jobs, the system now does support that. You'd be building out multiple application processes, which each have their own sets of calculation methods, tasks, so on and so forth. So what exactly is a calculation method and how does that tie into a task? Well, the tasks are all going to be things we're asking of the applicant during the process. Collecting information from them, requiring some sort of agreement to be signed or viewing some sort of disclosure. The calculation methods are used really in part to track that partial application and trigger automation within the task process. So for example, how do we identify exactly when we want to send a reminder to a candidate to complete their application if it's been left incomplete? Should that be 2 days, 5 days, 10 days after it's been sitting out? All of that is configurable and set up with these calculation methods. Within the tasks themselves, there's really kind of 2 primary types of tasks, forms and content. So the forms are going to be where we're asking the applicant to fill things out. So confirming personal information, adding educational history, employment history, references, etc. And with the content, that may be some sort of policy, disclosure, agreement, consent form that we're asking them to review and potentially sign, acknowledge, etc. For new customers, it's going to be enabled by default. So if you're new to Infor Talent Acquisition or thinking about Infor Talent Acquisition, the good news is this is what you're going to be using out of the box. If you're an existing customer using the old kind of legacy TA application process, there is a migration path moving forward, and we definitely recommend looking at it. You will need to upgrade to, I would recommend, the minimum is version, CU27, but looking at whatever's latest at the time of implementation. There's lots of new features and functionality released with each cyclic, and they come every other month or every month. If you're on the multi-tenant, you don't really have to worry about that. The system's upgraded on a regular basis and maintained by Infor. Once you have that upgrade in place, there are settings you need to enable to turn this on. So at the organization level, you have to toggle on the configurable job application. It's not something that's going to be enabled out of the box, which is kind of nice. If you're going to have to upgrade your system, you don't need to roll in and turn this on right out of the gate. You can still continue to use your old process and then choose when you want to turn this on and choose when you implement the configurable job application. When you do roll that out, your old and your new application processes can coexist. That's going to be tied directly to the requisition that an applicant is applying to. So anything net new from a requisition perspective will leverage the configurable job app, and your old requisitions, if they're still open and have postings, we'll continue to use the old apply process. So before we get into the actual application itself, I like to look at the back-end setup of this. So I'm into the system now as an administrator. This may look a little different for some of you if you've been in GHR before. This is the 4.0 controls. So that's why you have the different menu on the left and some of the different color schemes. We have that enabled for our system. But within the talent acquisition setup as an administrator, we now have a application setup menu where we define and manage our application processes. In my system, I have 2 different application processes. One is set as the default, and that will default into the form for all users. We can also do that defaulting again by position or requisition to control which application process is being used dynamically in the system. For each of these application processes, there's a number of things we're going to need to set up. First and foremost will be our tasks. So how many tasks do we want? What is the order of these tasks? What is the purpose of these tasks? All of these things are user defined and are configurable. It's something you are going to have to build out of the box. So there are some templates, some delivered forms, but it's pretty much up to the customer to decide what they want their process to look like and custom tailor it to fit those needs. In this example, I have 12 different tasks. I've displayed them in an order that I think makes sense for my organization, and we'll walk them through different parts of the application process, starting with the welcome page, collecting contact information, asking for validation of things that were uploaded from the resume, and then ultimately asking them to complete and validate their profile. We'll go through the application process as a candidate so you can actually see what that looks like in a second. We also have here these reminder flags, so these calculation methods we talked about. Down here, the date calculations for reminders, so we can set reminder 1, reminder 2. All of these are configurable, so when you want these to trigger or fire, that calculation method is how you define it. But this allows us to basically ask that candidate to come back. If they've left a partial app out there, the system will automatically determine that and ask them to come back and finish applying. We can have up to 2 different reminders there. There's also a number of different automations. So if at any point in the process you do want to, for example, trigger an email out to another department or back to the candidate or to the hiring manager when a certain event happens, all of that can be tied into the application process and set up here in the automation section. So once we have our application set up, we need to apply to it, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new candidate here, start from scratch. This is the external job board that's delivered out of the box. And we have a posting out here for a payroll manager position. I'm going to go ahead and apply. And this is where that changes. So if you're using Infor Talent Acquisition today and you have the candidate space deployed, all of this stays the same. Where this changes is when that apply button is clicked, the process turns over. So go ahead and click apply, and I'm going to register as a new candidate here. And during the apply process, you can either build your profile manually, or we can actually parse it from a resume. So I'm going to go ahead and upload a resume for parsing. And the nice thing about that is it will pre-populate anything it finds directly into my candidate profile in my application. So as I'm going through this process, you're going to see, it's asking me to either confirm, validate, or add to things like education, employment history, personal information that's been pulled from the resume and may either be, incomplete if something got missed and they need to add it, or they can just validate it and simply continue on. So what you're looking at now is the brand new configurable job application process that's candidate facing. So the nice thing about this is, A, it's consistent across both your external and your internal candidates. It's using that responsive design, so it's also consistent across the browser and mobile devices and usable on both. And then it's also consistent with, if you are implementing transition management, and then ultimately if you do hire this employee, that user experience is going to be consistent basically throughout the whole life cycle of that employee, from their initial application submission to hire when they get into the employee self-service. I think that consistency is a real big benefit of this new process. So all of the tasks that kind of do these side by side here, so you can see the setup on the back end. But it's basically going to walk me through all the tasks that I've set up on my app process as an administrator. You can see the content here on the right in the applicant portal. All of these forms that we have set up are delivered out of the box. So you don't need to do anything or build anything to use them. But one of the nice things with configurable job application is all of these are forms and lists and objects that can be modified using the configuration console. So traditionally, or prior to this functionality, forcing things to be required or hiding things really required a lot of kind of complex web development to that candidate space site. Now it's very easy to come in with the configuration console if needed and make additional fields required, hide certain fields, add certain text, things like that. It's very simple to do, very easy to do. But at this point, you can see it's parsed in everything from my resume, my primary email, my resume email, things like that. So I'm really, as an applicant, if I do have a clean resume that gets picked up and parsed, obviously you're filling out some self-identification, perhaps some work preferences, things like that. But largely, by and large, most of the stuff on my profile is going to be pulled in directly from that resume and not require me to re-input it. See, the educational records are in here. I can add them or delete them or update them if I'd like. I'm just going to keep moving on and go ahead and close out this application. So again, other things to think about with here is, is there a set of tasks that you need to ask of certain jobs and not others? What tasks are applicable to your organization? We can ask for things like social security number as part of this application process. We can ask for references. All of that is your choice, and it's something that's really important to look at and think about as you go through this design process, is what exactly you want to capture. And the system's flexible to accommodate pretty much all the use cases I've come across so far. Resume is already uploaded. You could put in a cover letter. And then at this point, we're just basically capturing an electronic signature or agreement, confirming that everything on the application is accurate. And then we'll go ahead and submit that into the system. At this point, I turn it back over to Paula to talk a little bit about the actual hiring workflow, which comes next in the process, and then jump back in for a demo in a little bit.
Thanks, Rob. So, configurable hiring workflow, what's it all about? So it's, now that we've used the configurable job application to make the application process better, we can now look to the configurable hiring workflow to make improvements to the recruiter and hiring manager process. Here we use a library of reusable workflow steps to build multiple workflows to target your various business needs. Like the application process, we can use eligibility groups to manage the requirements, and we can again default at the org level, the position level, or select by requisition. This new functionality will integrate seamlessly with the configurable job application as well as transition management to feed from and kick off steps or tasks respectively. It's also mobile friendly with all the responsive controls that come with the 4.0 controls. So again, why should we use it? We're going to eliminate all of those legacy TA pain points. You're no longer limited to the hard-coded section selection process. You can create as many or as few steps as you'd like and group them according to what works for you. You can also eliminate the manual steps you may be taking today within the hard-coded steps. This will allow you to gain consistency and task efficiency as well as reduce training time. The user experience will also benefit in that it will be consistent across manager and recruiter roles with a new mobile-friendly and responsive design. The big winner here, creating great efficiency to save time and money, is the ability to multi-select and take action on more than one record. So when can we use it? Again, this is available now. We just need to turn on the 4.0 controls and be at least CU19. Timeline is for implementing would be 3 to 6 months to work through the stages of project planning, design the workflows, look at redesign of the recruiter and manager roles, security role updates, piloting, and user acceptance testing. And I'll throw it back over to Rob for the how and another demo.
So a quick overview of some of the components involved with this. It's pretty similar to the application process, but a little bit more involved. Same concept here. We're going to have one-to-many hiring workflows. So at a minimum, you're going to need to define one for your organization. But perhaps the way you process applicants as a recruiter and as a hiring manager, could be different for different areas, departments, et cetera, within your organization. For that, you would simply create multiple hiring workflows and then default that in from the positions in the system as the requisitions get created. Once you have your hiring workflow defined, the next thing to think about is our workflow steps. So what steps are going to be involved in the process? For example, where do we put applicants when they're in a partial application? What step are they in after they've applied? How many different steps do we need for the recruiter screening? How many steps do we need for the hiring manager? What does our offer process look like? And then what does our pre-boarding and hire process look like? All of that generally is going to be consistent across most organizations, but how granular you are with that amount of steps, how many different people participate, what actually happens in those steps is what you're going to be configuring. Our workflow categories are nice ways of grouping these steps together. So within a set of steps, some example categories might be new applicant, screening, hiring manager review, pre-boarding, et cetera. So think of that in a workflow category as really a logical grouping of steps, and all of your steps should belong to a workflow category. Within that workflow step, once you've defined that process and workflow, we need to think about what happens within each of those steps. So that's, what actions are available. For example, scheduling an interview or defining an offer are pretty unique steps, pretty unique actions to a certain grouping of steps. We wouldn't want those types of actions to be available in all the steps in our workflow. We can support that with the configuration. What kind of automation do we need? So when someone moves into a pre-boarding step, we automatically create their pre-boarding program. When an applicant moves into a hiring manager review step, we automatically send an email notification to the hiring manager announcing that. All of that automation is part of this configurable hiring workflow and supported out of the box. The communications categories and screening categories, this is just a helpful way of grouping, your email templates and screening packages per, relevant step. So for example, the email communication we may be sending to an applicant who is in a new under review status is going to be very different from the types of communication we're sending to an applicant that's in a higher status or an offer status. So assigning categories to these workflow steps and having your email templates linked to these categories helps with processing and efficiency with contacting and managing the applicants during the process. So for the live demo, I'll jump back into the system here. Again, I'm going to look at this really first as a recruiter, because I think this does a nice job of explaining how to manage the requisitions and how that workflow step looks. So the big thing with this is recruiter and manager redesign. So what does that mean? When you enable these 4.0 controls, which is a prerequisite for using the configurable hiring workflow, a lot changes with the requisition dashboard, both for the recruiter and the hiring manager. We're just going to be looking at the recruiter view because it's very similar to the hiring manager. There's just a little bit more functionality available. But understand that what the hiring manager sees is going to be very consistent with this, and it's going to be different from what they see today. So the overall layout design, I think it's much improved, more efficient. You'll notice, on the dashboard, real-time access to different metrics and reports for our requisitions, and then ultimately drilling into our workflow. So different ways to manage the requisitions. Here I'm going to click on, requisition 48, which was the job that I applied to in the previous demo for the application process. We click on the workflow step. This is where we start to see the configurable hiring workflow in action. So what you see here in this middle column is all of my steps in the darker gray color. And then the lighter gray rows are the groupings or my categories. This can be used to logically hide and access different workflow steps during processing. Think about this too as who is going to be involved, who needs to participate in this step. Your security may need to be reviewed for your hiring managers. For example, we may not want them to see or participate in any of the steps until the hiring manager review. So when they log into the dashboard and look, they won't see these top 3 categories or any of their steps. They will see from the hiring manager forward. So when we look at the workflow steps, it is a logical process, kind of moving through the life cycle of the application. All of this, the names of these steps, the order of the steps, the number of the steps, the grouping of the steps. Again, there will be some consistencies across pretty much all the customer base, but the configurability of this feature allows you to really change and tailor what exactly this is for you. So it may and likely will not look like how I have my system up. The idea here is that you're able to change it to meet your unique business needs. So first I have, for looking at this, the prospective applicant step. So this is going to be if I manually attach a candidate that I found to one of my requisitions, they'll get defaulted into here and then asked to apply to the process. Within the new step, we can see we already have some applications out here. So again, that incomplete application tracking that Paula had mentioned earlier. We can see here now that Joe Doe has applied to this requisition, but didn't complete it. We have visibility into that. We have them ordered and tracked in our partial application workflow step. And we can also see where did they stop. So this individual didn't get very far. They went in and basically clicked apply and they got to that welcome page and exited. So you have that visibility of metrics into not just is the application complete, but where did they stop? And then also as a recruiter, did we send reminders yet? Number 1, number 2, and when did they apply? All of that's visible right within the dashboard. Applications that apply successfully go into this application under review step. If they were to be screened out via profile questions, that automation would move them here automatically. From here, we can move candidates in and out of the various steps, multiple select. We can batch move candidates. We can click and drag the candidates throughout the process. All of this is supported within this new recruiter redesign when the configurable hiring workflow is enabled. The rest of these steps are pretty general, but again, all of that is configurable, and that's something you would aim to help flush out and design during your implementation, really thinking through what steps are needed, what kind of automations are needed for movement, for notifications, and how do we want to group these by category. A couple other things to call out within the new recruiter redesign. It's kind of this card view access for our applicants. Provides quick access to a lot of need-to-know information. When you drill into the applications, that new experience is consistent there too. Or you can get quick access to different metrics, tabs, et cetera, for the applicant, manage it this way. I think one of the coolest things about the recruiter redesign, and one of the biggest things I've seen as a pay point, is traditionally as a recruiter, you're managing the requisitions individually. So if you're a recruiter who manages many, many, many requisitions, this can be a very cumbersome way to do your job. Having to click in multiple times to each requisition and then look at each workflow step. Some of that has been addressed now with the configurable hiring workflow. So within this requisition view, we can manage by step. But within this step, it's still tied to requisition 48. I'm not seeing all partial applicants. We can also click on the All tab here and view all applicants for the specific requisition. And then there's now a resume view as well. So if they've uploaded a resume into the system, we can see that and manage this resume view. Or if they didn't upload a resume, the system will generate one for you so that you can manage it this way and send it out. If you're trying to manage by workflow step rather than by requisition, we also have this workflows menu now. So what this allows you to do is drill into a specific workflow and go by step and look at all applications in that step, regardless of their requisition. So this is when it becomes very powerful and very useful for recruiters who may be interested in or have to manage applicants in a specific step, regardless of requisition. You now have that visibility and functionality out of the box built into the requisition dashboard or the recruiter dashboard. Going to the back end part of the system, let's take a look at how this is set up. When you have the configurable hiring workflow enabled, Similar to the application process, we also have a number of hiring workflows. Again, your organization has to have a minimum of one, but you can also have multiple to support different job functions or business units within your organization. I've been looking at the selection workflow, so we'll drill into that and take a look. And let's look at the steps. So here's where we're defining the order and name of each step effectively. With that, we're also deciding what category does this step belong to. So in my example, I've decided a new candidate could either be a partial application, someone who is screened out automatically online, or someone who's completed their application and is ready for review by a recruiter. All these workflow category names and how you assign them to your steps are totally configurable and should be part of your design. We also have different types of steps. So how do we classify a step? Well, for a screen out, this is actually where a candidate has been dispositioned. They're no longer under consideration for the role. It may have happened automatically via the system, or it may have happened because the recruiter or hiring manager went in and dispositioned them. It's important to use this type to classify what type of step this is. We have different disposition steps throughout the process so that we can capture, track, and report on not just why or the reason for disposition, but when did it happen? You know, it may be helpful to know that they were automatically screened out here versus not selected after an assessment or not selected after a hiring manager review. All of that can be tracked and managed with your steps. How does some of the routing and automation occur? So there's advanced automation you can add in. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But at a minimum, you're going to have to define what your application routing is. So for example, what happens when you attach a candidate to a requisition manually? What step do they go to? If you've done that and they actually submit an application, what step do they go to? In this example, for somebody who's been attached or somebody who's done a partial or started application on their own, I have them both going to the same step. But if it was desirable to put them into different steps because different people are responsible for managing them or there's different activities that need to occur, all of that can be configured here. Going through the rest of the options, you can set what happens when you screen someone out, when an offer has been submitted, approved, accepted, declined, what steps, what workflow steps do you want them to put the candidate in? Again, all of this is configurable. You need to decide if you need separate workflow steps for this or if they all could be the same. Throughout the process, then, we also have disposition reasons. So if a candidate declines, we can automatically assign the disposition reason and move them to a step. Same with that screen out online. We also have some added flexibility into how we manage closing a requisition. So at what step do you want to remove postings? When do you want to mark the requisition as filled? When do you want to close that requisition? All of that can be automated based on movement of candidates in or out of certain steps. We also support automatic dispositioning. So you can say that once, for example, a requisition's been filled, we automatically disposition all the candidates who've applied to that application. Do you want to do that at fill, close, cancel, et cetera? All of that can be set up. Just jumping back a second, similar implementation steps here. So new customers, this is enabled by default. You get it, you're forced to use it, and I think that's a good thing. For existing customers, this is also an optional but strongly encouraged upgrade or migration. So this is something, again, that you're going to need to be upgraded to the latest and greatest version to be running, but you get to choose when and how you enable that configurable hiring workflow feature. Once it is turned on, all new requisitions are going to be leveraging the new configurable hiring workflow, and the old requisitions will be migrated into the configurable hiring workflow. Lastly, just some final thoughts, things to think about with the configurable features in talent acquisition. Again, can't state this enough, but these are available now, and you really do need to consider upgrading to the latest version of the applications. Paula had mentioned earlier specific CUs that these features were made generally available. While that would be a minimum requirement, I would strongly encourage moving to whatever is the latest and greatest. I wouldn't say there's issues per se with these specific modules, more so that there's a lot of new functionality being rolled out that in order to take advantage of, you're going to need to be on a more up-to-date CU. So look at, if you're going down this path and you're running global HR now or talent acquisition now, expect to be upgrading your application and your environment, again, if you are a single tenant or an on-premise customer. If you're running in the multi-tenant Infor Cloud Suite, you're already upgraded. With the Soho XI 4.0 controls, these are great. I like the feature. It's hard to go back now that I've been using it. I think there's a lot of enhancements in the usability functionality, not just in the CHW and CJA, but all across the entire application. But what we found in the field is just something you really do kind of carefully need to plan the rollout. Why that is obviously one, change management. So it does change the look and feel of the application, and you may need to manage that with your employees, your managers, field representatives, et cetera. Also from a technology perspective, in general, Infor is deprecating support or ending support for Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer also does not really handle these 4.0 controls very well. The response times are very slow. So with that, you would need to expect that you're moving to a default standard for Infor of the Chrome or Microsoft Edge browsers, the newer version. And that has some implications to enterprise IT. If IE or Internet Explorer is the default browser on the workstations in your organization, and it's going to be not very performant, you may need to look at how and when you can enable or roll out these other browsers to support Soho 4.0. And the impact of that obviously is bigger than Infor within the enterprise IT landscape. Also recommend implementing both of these simultaneously. We covered them separately in the presentation because they are separate features. But during the demos, as you can see, they kind of tie together hand in hand. We recommend, from an implementation perspective, trying to do them both at the same time. I think that will reduce your overall timeline and increase your return on investment. Plan for end user training. Again, this ties back to the Soho 4.0 and some of that recruiter, hiring manager redesign. This is going to be a very different, I think improved, but different experience for your hiring managers and recruiters. So there may need to be additional training, change management processes that are put in place for that. I think most importantly is what I've seen with some of these legacy TA implementations or builds within Infor is there's a lot of configuration, customization, extensions that are built out to support it and make it function. What I've seen with these new configurable hiring, workflow, and job application features, a lot of that can go away. So I think that's a huge win with implementing these, is it brings a lot of features to the table that customers have been wanting. And that also gives your IT an opportunity to maybe retire, sunset some of your configurations and customizations in the application that will no longer be needed. I think that's a huge win that makes upgrading long-term support and maintenance of the system much easier. And finally, I would say that going through these implementations myself, compared to the old way that the talent acquisition worked, it is a lot more work to set this up. If you think about it, they give you nothing out of the box, and you need to build your entire workflow process. No one tells you this is how an application process works, or this is the life cycle of an application during the hiring process. You have to decide that. You have to build that. So with that added responsibility and flexibility, obviously there's going to be more work, but I think that's a good thing. Just plan ahead and make sure you have adequate time to go through a thorough design and review process. I think the major improvement in functionality and usability is ultimately worth it. That wraps up the content we have for today. At this point, we can open it up for any questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute your line. Also, again, my name is Rob Flannery, and then Paula Nall was my colleague who is also helping with the presentation. Both of our contact information is listed on this slide, and you can feel free to reach out with any questions. Let's see the chat. Okay, doesn't look like there are many other questions. Someone asked if we're going to send the presentation out, and yes, we will be. So that'll be coming out shortly. If there's not anything else, thanks again, everyone, for your time, and have a good rest of your day.